So my presentation, I really hope this isn't too loud. So if you don't get that, then read my bio of the program. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about console modding. I got really bored with this presentation's title because we had another presentation that was Format String Vulnerabilities 101. So I was like, console modding 101 sounds really boring, so I added a longer title for you guys to read. So basically an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about homebrew piracy and the difference between the two. I'm also going to talk about types of mods you can do to these consoles, software for one, and then so anyway, I'm going to talk about finding an exploitable hole through software. I'm also going to talk about hardware and physical case mods as well as electronic mods, and then consoles in general with an overview of mods for each of them. Basically a mod for a console allows it to play certain things or do certain things, particularly running unsigned code. So homebrew, what is the point of modding a game console? These guys sitting next to me, both very small, powerful computers. They're low cost. You can buy a used Xbox for about $100 now if you can find it. Probably even lower than that, 70 if you know where to look. You can't really get a computer for 70 bucks that's as powerful as that thing, to be honest with you, and it's not that powerful. So $250 for a Wii. It's got a PowerPC processor in it that runs pretty fast. So anyway, the other thing you can do is hack them, and then there's also nefarious purposes, which is where I get to talk about piracy. So piracy in the terms of console modding is when you would probably be downloading copies of video games. They're distributed over the net in various places. They're in ISO type formats. Not all of them are in ISO. Some of them require more fancy formats to get all the little bits on there so you can actually play it. There's a lot of people in the console industry, in the video game entertainment industry, that actually believe that you can't have homebrew on these things, meaning a custom application, something I wrote myself, without enabling piracy. I don't actually believe that's true. I think there's a very distinct difference between the two groups of people that are involved in each. And when I get to talk about the Wii here in a minute, I'll talk about why that is. So companies try very, very hard to stop piracy. Unfortunately, they do stop homebrew when they try and stop piracy. They also don't try hard enough, which I'll get to. So let's talk about Alice, Bob, and Charlie. Those of you into cryptology already probably know about these three characters. They're always up to something. Traditional encryption methodology stands that basically you have a character named Alice. She wants to send a secret message to Bob, and then Charlie's going to intercept it. Charlie can't read the message, though, because he doesn't have the end result of the message, which is what Bob has. He also doesn't have the keys to decrypt the message. However, when you apply traditional encryption methodology to game consoles and DRM, digital rights management, it fails miserably. If you have a company or know a company that works in that realm of content encryption and what have you, tell them they're idiots, get out of it now, it's going to fail. It's a waste of time and money. So what happens in the case of consoles, it's as if Alice has sent Bob the secret message, but along with the secret message, she also said, hey Bob, I know you can't read this properly, so I'm going to give you the keys to decipher it and the decoded message. She might have scrambled them up a little bit and not told him which one's which, but they're all three of them are there, and it really defeats the purpose of having a secret message to begin with. Yet again, it fails. So that's traditional encryption methodology and why it fails so miserably with consoles. So with consoles, you have software modifications, and I guess the question is, how do you find an exploitable hole in something that you can't load a binary onto? So the Wii, for instance, I can't magically take a CDR, put it in my computer, write some PowerPC code, and execute it on there. It won't work. The reason it won't work is because Nintendo has implemented in their brilliant ideas here. They've implemented all these keys that I have to have and sign my applications with, my programs with, in order for this to work. But the thing is, Nintendo also doesn't check for vulnerabilities in these things. And as Daryl was saying just a little while ago, there are all sorts of vulnerabilities that are left open. Developers are lazy, and I believe Daryl said that as well. Smart, maybe you can call it that. Libraries provide exploits across platforms and systems. What I mean by that is that different library files, say, for interpreting JPEGs, different companies will use the same library file, but like, yeah. I will tell you.
All right, I got the button though. Just say it.
So anyway, before I was interrupted here. So these libraries get used on different systems. What this means basically is that some code that'll exploit a JPEG vulnerability on a Windows machine might actually exploit the same vulnerability on a Wii or an Xbox. This didn't happen with these two particular consoles, but it did happen in the case of Sony's PlayStation Portable console, which the initial vulnerability that was found was through a PNG or a TIFF exploit, I believe. And basically what was found was a buffer overflow. They wrote some extra stuff to the file caused the system to cough a couple of times, and then eventually they found a way onto it and load code. Firmware updates can also be decrypted and decompiled, which is another way that the PSP was later found. What happened was these guys wrote this vulnerability for the JPEG exploit. It was an image exploit. They wrote this vulnerability, and what they were able to do was find the keys on the console for how Sony was signing firmware updates. They figured out the keys, they unsigned the firmware updates, and now they release custom firmware for the thing, yet again proving that it's pointless. So, hardware modifications. Sometimes the simplest way is the best. What I mean by that is basically changing the physical case hardware for easier loading or swapping of disks. The original PlayStation and GameCube both were vulnerable to this. So with the PlayStation, you could actually jam something into the slot that detected whether the lid was closed on it. And if you jammed something in there and then you were quick about switching disks, you could actually play Japanese import games or your own custom games, which there weren't many of for the original PlayStation. This later worked for the PlayStation 2 because Sony didn't bother fixing it. It also works with the GameCube, so if you have one, you can go try this. There are companies on the web that sell custom cases designed explicitly for doing this sort of thing. With the GameCube, you actually need a custom case because they don't offer, the GameCube takes these little tiny discs. It's not that you can't use those little discs, but if you want to use a big CD, it'll actually take them. You can shove them in there magically. What this does is, you have to buy the case to do this. You can't just shove the disc in there. Don't try that. So what this does is it bypasses the software validity checks, and what Sony and Nintendo were doing was checking for, is this disc valid at the very beginning of the stage. Now they've moved on past that. Now they're checking every other thing that gets thrown at the console. Is this line of code valid, or is this application valid? So it allows unsigned code to be loaded.
Fight my shiny metal ass.
So the other thing you've got here is physical electrical modding. What you're seeing right there is Team Infectus. They are a group that releases the various mods for this. They're actually WAB in this case, using Team Infectus devices. What they're trying to do very hard in this picture is decrypt or grab the contents of the Wii's RAM, because there has been a race to get unsigned code to load on this thing for the past 6 months, roughly. So yeah, that's what's going on there. But this leads to electrical modding. So, how do you do electrical modding on a console instead of software modding? You first have to crack open the console and find out what chips are inside of it. So, companies are also lazy, as are developers. Smart, maybe. These chips that they put inside these things end up in a variety of systems, and the hardware description language, HDL, is reused throughout chips in various things. So in this case, the Wii here uses a, VPU and an IBM-made CPU. The IBM CPU will run normal PowerPC code. The problem is getting it on there. The other thing that recently happened is that AMD ATI has released all the graphics specs for their cards to be open source compatible, I guarantee you that some of that code, the hardware for it, is in this console. But there's more to it than that. The VPU, Nintendo actually paid a lot of money to ATI. I don't know how much, but they had to pay a lot because custom hardware doesn't come cheap in this size. In this case, ATI decided they were going to embed, or Nintendo asked ATI, can you embed an ARM CPU onto this VPU chip? And ATI said, yeah, sure. The ARM CPU handles all of the encryption. This is interesting because in the case of the Wii, the guys who were actually breaking into it managed to find a way onto it by crossing some lines on one of the RAM chips, and they were figuring out how to read addresses out of this thing. And so they grabbed some of the application on there and tried decompiling it. They tried first decompiling it with a PowerPC decompiler and realized this isn't working very well. So what they ended up doing after that was trying other language, other architectures, and decompiling it. They realized, hey, this decompiles with an ARM architecture. That's sort of weird. So they realized they were actually looking at ARM code that was handling the encryption of this thing. And then they found the keys. So once you start doing all this research, you can actually start looking up, because you know which things are coming off this chip, you can start hooking this thing up to a scope and looking at it and seeing what's going on. So I'm going to let this guy do some talking. This is actually a presentation from part of a presentation from the Chaos Communications Conference, I believe. And the guy who's talking is one of the guys who got the Wii, the homebrew working on the Wii recently. So.
All right, so I have been playing around. I had some friends who've been playing around with this Wii here for a little bit, and they actually. It's a pretty neat, nice little system. It's a little bit smaller than the Xbox 360 there. It doesn't have nearly as nice hardware. It's basically an improved game. They made some smart decisions. They upped the processor by a little bit. They beefed up the graphics hardware. And mainly they just added some new devices like the Bluetooth controller, internal Wi-Fi that allows, you have the Knee controller and some other stuff. So they did some things and they came up with some nice ideas for ways to make better games. And I think it's to their credit that it's still very hard to buy a new one of these. They're very hard to find in the store. So they seem to have done well enough even with a stripped down minimal hardware approach. So one of the challenges they had in making the system work is that they wanted to preserve full backward compatibility with GameCube games, which on a superficial level is easy because it uses the same processor, just a little bit faster. But also there were a number of other issues with, if we have this extra hardware, we'll confuse it. So their solution to this was they step back a little bit. The processor used in both the GameCube and in the Wii is a modified, or it's almost off-the-shelf IBM PowerPC processor. The one in the Wii is called the Broadway. And next to it has an ATI developed graphics chip, which they call the Hollywood. And that, it turned out, actually is a very interesting chip because it has what Nintendo refers to as an I/O processor bridge in it. But it's actually a full-fledged embedded ARM core that we've nicknamed the Starlet as part of Hollywood. So it does a lot of the authentication and all the checks and all the gatekeeping. And so this device is the gatekeeper through which all of the neat stuff like USB, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi is done. And so what happens is this chip checks, and it sits in between the DVD drive and the rest of the system. And when it detects that you're trying to boot a GameCube game, it more or less shuts itself off. It shuts off all the interesting hardware. It restricts the area of memory that you're allowed to access. And so you can run your old GameCube games, which aren't encrypted, don't have much protection, and it works out fine. You can run GameCube Linux on it, but you don't get any of the neat new Wii features. You've got a GameCube. So one of the things that they didn't do is they don't have this whole encrypted memory scheme. And so what we were able to do is do what we call a tweezer attack, where one of the restrictions they put in to keep something like this from happening is this chip is a gatekeeper between the processor and the memory, and it only lets the processor see like the lower 1/8 page of the memory because that's all of the GameCube had. We had more memory, and in that memory there are fun things like encryption and decryption keys. But you can't see them because you can't get to that memory. Well, if you manage to tie two of the address lines together for a brief moment, and then have it try to read the memory, it turns out you can actually read all of the memory with a few little maneuvers. So we were able to do that and then hook up a serial line to one of the controller ports and dump a bunch of data out and parse through it or whatever. And so with that, we were able to recover some encryption keys. And so then I think I have something I can show, hopefully. So this is something, this is hot off the presses. This first worked about an hour ago. So hopefully it'll still work. Thank you.
So one of the things you're going to see
Sorry
here
that it looks.
is he's going to use Lego Star Wars to start this. They've
It's
actually
not really
changed
Lego
it now.
Star Wars, but right now we're still basically patching other code we found. Someday we'll have a nice, Linux bootable DVD, but until that point, all I can show is that we do have code running. It is running in Wii mode, not GameCube mode, because we do actually have access to all the hardware. So, this is something that certainly was not all me, but I'm the only one here to actually present about it. We hope to have a release sometime soon, but not yet. It's still very, very rough. Like I said, I don't even have any slides, so we didn't think it was going to work. But it did work last minute, so we thought we'd stand up and show this is what happens if you don't have encryption.
So yeah, that was basically how they were able to do this and why it works now. The game they're actually using now, what they found was they started decrypting the game saves on this thing with the keys they found. And once they decrypted those game saves, they realized in the Zelda game for it, the Zelda... Yeah, there we go. That's it. I got it sitting around here somewhere. Do it. Oh, that's probably where it is then. Oh, look at that. Move my box. See, this is what happens when you move things on. So anyway, they found out that this game was vulnerable. What they did was they decrypted the game saves with it, and they realized that the name, at the beginning of the game, you actually get to name your horse. I believe that Link names his horse Epona traditionally. But anyway, in this particular game, you can actually choose the name of your horse. So as it turns out, if you name your horse exclamation point, percent sign, pound, ASCII, whatever, then it coughs and it goes, oh, I can't pronounce that. Let me give you a way to execute your code now. That's what they do. And I'll actually demonstrate that in a little while. For the exploit to work, you actually have to, you can actually run backwards. I'm not sure what that does, but they've got it working like that now. But you can walk forwards and talk to the guy, and as soon as you hit the button to talk to him, he's going to say the name of your horse, and the machine dies, so that you can get access to it. So anyway, the work that these guys have to do with these various consoles leads to mod chips eventually in the terms of hardware. There are different types of mod chips. There are solder and there are solderless. Over on the solder side here, you actually are looking at 2 chips designed specifically for the Wii. The funny part is when I was saying that there is a difference between homebrew and piracy and why enabling homebrew doesn't necessarily enable piracy, the Wii was hacked in terms of enabling piracy within about 3 weeks of it being out. It turns out it uses the exact same methodology for verifying disks as the GameCube. Whoops. So it was hacked in terms of that, but it did not allow for custom code. And they've just recently, within the last 3 months, literally I made my presentation, I had to go back and change it because of all this stuff, because I didn't think I was going to have anything to run on this, which is why the Xbox is here. But anyway, they've literally found a way to do this now. So mod chips are typically based on custom ASICs or FPGAs. They're sometimes based on embedded microprocessors in the case of the Wii mod chips, and some of them are even based on custom silicon, although that's pretty rare. You can update some of them. In the case of the Xbox, you actually, with some of the mod chips, you do actually have to load firmware onto them before you can use them, and that firmware has to be obtained through more nefarious websites. So, buying mod chips. First thing you need to do is read about what kind of mod chips you want to buy. By the way, if anybody has any questions for me, feel free to ask them. I don't care if you don't say them to me. Check out the features you're looking for, in particular talking about the Xbox currently, because current generation of hardware, the Wii, the PS3, and the Xbox 360, don't really have a wide selection. The Wii does, so I guess both of these. Read reviews, check out, make sure it's got the features you're looking for first, whether you want to play video games that are copies or whatever. I don't really care. Use a payment method you can trust. Don't go using your actual credit card or company credit card or something someone's going to scam from you, because scams are really, really common. You have to read reviews about the purchase site before you do this. Make sure the reviews you read are current. I made that mistake, and that was sort of bad because I was out $80. Like I said, scams are really common. The website I thought I was getting this from was trusted on the reviews I did read, but the reviews I was reading weren't exactly up to date, and it's entirely possible that they were written by whoever owned the fucking website, which really annoys me. So, it's $80. I'm not going to cry too much over it, but it was $80. I'm a college student, so. It's a lot like buying a car. You do have to look around for a good price as well. Not everything is the same on the net. You can find places that will offer an Xbox chip for $80 and places that will offer it for $100. So look around. So I'm going to talk about the consoles now, a couple of different ones. The first one I'm going to talk about here is the PSP, which is the PlayStation Portable. Sony makes this thing. Firmware hacks are really, really, really common for this now, and the way they do it is, nowadays, the people that have these things, what they'll do is they'll get a battery with it, and the battery actually has a chip on it. Why the hell Sony did this, I don't know. Most batteries don't come with magical chips on them, but in this case, Sony decided they were going to stick a chip on it. God knows why. Well, guess what the chip allows you to do? It allows you to boot up some custom code off of the chip and then flash the firmware on the thing. Oopsie. There's a huge homebrew community for the PlayStation Portable. I was involved in it way back when it started, though I didn't do a whole lot. I helped port Scum VM to it at one point, which is sort of cool. Lua is pretty common on it now. There's a lot of games you can play with that. C, there's other stuff too. There's tons of emulators for this thing, so if you happen to have Game Boy apps lying around, Game Boy games lying around emulated format, you can actually play those on there. The other thing people are starting to do with it now is custom hardware for it. People with interface to GPS to it. There's also I/O for serial communications, I2C, TWI, that sort of thing. Next up is the Nintendo DS. The Nintendo DS, the homebrew for it is done via cartridges, much like it was done via the Game Boys. There was a couple of people, not at the last Hope, but the Hope conference before that. Hope's the 2600 conference in New York. It's Hackers on Planet Earth, which that conference, I believe there were a couple of guys there who presented something on Game Boy modding and how to use Game Boys to make music, which is sort of neat. You can actually do that with them. They work really well as MIDI devices, as it turns out. Some of these cartridges involve USB connector. They use flash memory. I actually had this slide initially a different cartridge up here. But anyway, for the Nintendo DS, there are slot 1 cartridges and there are slot 2 cartridges. Slot 1 cartridges are Game Boy Advanced. They fit in the big giant slot on the thing. Slot 2 cartridges look more like SD cards and they fit in the tiny slot. Slot 2 cards are currently used for booting the thing so that you can use the storage you have on slot 1 cards to then play whatever it is you want to play. The Nintendo DS uses 2 ARM microprocessors. You cannot access both of them at once, from my understanding, though I admit that my understanding on that's sort of rudimentary. ARM code does work on the thing. You do have to use the custom development kit, which is out there. I actually think SourceForge might be hosting it at this point, which is sort of cool. C and C++ are the most common languages for it. Emulators are what people typically use this for. So then there's PS2 and the GameCube. I've already sort of talked about them. The case mod that you're seeing there is actually for the PlayStation 2. What it allows you to do is open the lid of the thing and flip the disc out without having to put something in there and mess up your console. It also allows you to put your console inside of a nice, pretty transparent case if you're into that sort of thing. The disc swap method is what this is for. It doesn't typically work on the newer models, though sometimes it does. Mod chips exist for both the GameCube and the PlayStation 2 now. Or you can buy them pre-modded from a lot of these websites that sell mod chips. Like I said, just check out the websites first and make sure they're safe before you go spending money on it. The Xbox, which seems to be everyone's favorite, and I can tell you why. It's a PC, so you can run all sorts of stuff on it. The coolest thing you can do on it is run Linux, which is a non-Microsoft app. So it can be done via software through overflow attacks, and there's somebody in the room, I don't know if he's here. Got it? Got it? Okay. So anyway, the Xbox can be modded through software, through overflow attacks. What it does is it uses the same sort of game save attacks that I was talking about on the Wii, and it'll overflow certain parts of memory and allow you to get onto the console and then load some custom code, which in turn loads custom firmware onto it. Richard, you've done this, I believe.
Yeah.
I would personally suggest doing it via mod chip because I think saying you chipped your console sounds way cooler than you put a disc in it and loaded some stuff onto it via USB. I'm not making fun of you. The cheaper way and probably the smarter way is to do it with that. The other thing is the software method doesn't work on the new ones. It works on the old ones just fine, but it won't necessarily work on the new ones. The thing this allows you to do eventually is to add a bigger hard disk to it. You can do more with the networking. You can host a server on it. I know there's a couple of websites on the net that are actually hosted on these things. God knows why, but people do it. It's a fairly nice console. It's fairly well-rounded as far as what it offers. And like I said before, it's a Microsoft product that you can run Linux on. So, now the Wii. Like I said before, Nintendo's researchers aren't too bright. They use the exact same verification procedure with this console as they used with the GameCube, and literally it was hacked in 3 weeks to run pirated software. So their whole plan behind signing and putting all this money into security measures to prevent me from running custom code on the machine I purchased did nothing, because in the end, the piracy guys, the guys who've been doing this forever, have found a way to run their stuff on it, and they weren't intent on running custom code. They were just interested in running what they had, and they did very well, so you could actually run pirated games on it. It is the worst name for a console ever. Having to say you're playing with your Wii. Nintendo, the Revolution was a better name for this thing when it was a code name. I don't know why they named it that. Anyway.
Wii is the Japanese word for everybody.
If that's what Nintendo wants, if that's what Nintendo wants to believe, then I'll let them believe that. I'm not faulting you. I'm not faulting you. It's just that having to say I play with my Wii doesn't sound right.
You gotta shake the stick around.
Yeah, you gotta waggle the stick. Stick waggling. Case in point. We know what he's doing after the conference. Anyway. So mod chips exist. They don't allow for homebrew, but you don't have to have a mod chip for homebrew for it anymore. Like I said, I sort of read this presentation before they actually hacked this thing, so that's why that line's in there. The mod chips do allow for GameCube mode homebrew because the console has two different modes, as that guy was explaining in the presentation. It has GameCube mode where you can load the tiny disc, and then it has Wii mode where it can actually load the larger DVD disc that are games for it. So you could actually, with a mod chip before, previously load GameCube code like you could on the GameCube. But it really didn't buy you anything. It was a GameCube. I don't know. So homebrew in Wii mode, brand new. It's a software hack from keys they found in the hardware, as was explained. So it's new and improved, meaning it's still in development and it's just now coming out. The screenshot you're seeing here, which actually isn't a screenshot, it's a picture of my TV apartment. Is the initial code. If you see there, I don't know if you can read the top line, but it says Wii Elf Loader version 0.1 Alpha 1. They're currently at version 0.3 Alpha something, I don't know. It hasn't advanced much further, basically. It is a Wii ELF loader now. An ELF is an executable linear format. What that means is it's basically a standard binary file format for these consoles. The file is encrypted and signed. The guys who released this particular hack haven't really released the signature keys for this thing yet, but it's only a matter of time before somebody else figures out a way to get that information. And then the companies that make money, I don't know if you guys remember GameShark. GameShark was a company that developed disks that would allow you to load up some custom hex code before you loaded a game on the PlayStation, and a couple other consoles too. But that custom code allowed you to like enter cheat modes on the console basically by placing some things in memory that shouldn't have been there. That's probably what this homebrew is eventually going to lead to. There's a company called Datel that releases things like that. I believe their product's called Action Replay. They'll have one for this thing probably in a year, my guess. So the hack utilizes a buffer overflow in the save game file, namely the name of Link's horse, and work is very much still in progress. The Xbox 360, which is an interesting console. So people have asked Microsoft, Microsoft saw what was happening with the Xbox actually, and people were asking for it, begging for it, that they wanted to put homebrew in this thing. Microsoft said, all right, we'll compromise with you. We'll give you the developer studio to put your stuff on this thing for $100, $99. And it's good business for Microsoft because they're making $100 off of people who want to pay for it and load stuff on here. The people who really want to load stuff on here are going to find the $100 and pay for it. But at the same time, if you purchase something, shouldn't you have the right to run stuff on it that you want to run? I mean, that's not really fair, in my opinion, to charge me $300 for the console and then say, no, you can't run your own stuff on it, sorry. I don't like that idea. Mod chips exist for playing backups on it currently. They're needed for the unofficial homebrew that's out there now. Somebody recently got Linux loaded onto the thing. I can't tell you exactly how because of the details on it are sort of scant. A lot of the teams, which brings me to another point that I don't have in here, but a lot of the teams that get together and start finding ways to exploit this hardware in various pieces, they don't release details on it. And the reason they don't release details is because they're always hoping that the exploits they have at their disposal will eventually lead them to a breakthrough with it to where they can be the ones that take credit for loading homebrew onto these things. So they don't release the details to the public because they don't want other teams of modders to get on there and get credit for it. It's a big competition thing, so yeah, that's the 360. The PlayStation 3 is sort of similar to the 360 because you can install, well, with the exception that you can install Linux on it out of the box, which means you can run custom code. The problem is Sony hired the same idiot researchers as Nintendo and has decided that you can't access the 3D accelerator, nor can you access the actual thread that's running in the background, keeping their internal operating system on this thing running and everything synced up. So you can't access this extra thread on what amounts to a PowerPC CPU with a bunch of different threads, 7 I believe. No mod chips exist for it currently. The Blu-ray discs that ship for this game console, because all the games are Blu-ray, are impossible to copy right now. People haven't found a way around the Blu-ray encryption entirely yet. And even when they do, they're going to have to figure out a way to get the console to recognize the disc. I suspect it won't be maybe a year and a half before somebody figures out what they need to do on this thing. Sony hasn't said that they won't allow access to the 3D accelerator, just to clarify. What they're not doing is providing specifications for how to access it, so it's entirely possible that someone might be able to. There is some sort of modifications for it, software that you can run, but it's all really crappy. And it all requires that you don't update the firmware on the thing. And if you don't update the firmware, you can't play online, you can't do anything with it. It's sort of worthless. So, like I said, give it a year and a half. So that's the end of my presentation. And if you guys have questions, I would appreciate you asking them. I'm going to demonstrate some stuff, though, so it's not entirely done. It's just the end of this part. Stroger, I don't know where he's at.
All right.
Well, somebody's going to look for him. Al Stroger ran away with the microphone, so if you want to ask without,
I can speak loud.
That's fine. Speak loudly.
He said he has no question.
Why didn't you take a Judge Dredd show? Right before I walked in the room.
Oh, that's what go entertain these people.
Did anybody find that fun? No?
That was hilarious.
Since you're skipping my presentation.
Is it you again?
Yeah, it was me again. So,
What are all the questions from this guy? Like you want to learn something.
so what's wrong with just pirating the SDK for the Xbox 360?
So you could go pirate the SDK, but there's all sorts of... Basically, Microsoft with their SDK for the 360 is allowing you to run custom code on it up to a point. You can't run really large things, so that excludes Linux. You can also load another OS onto it. There are various agreements and things that are in the way, basically keeping you from doing that. The homebrew effort that's underway right now is keeping you, is allowing people to do that. So that's the rationale behind it. It allows you to run some custom code, but it doesn't give you full access to the hardware. And if you're paying for something, I believe you should have full access to it.
So the SDK sucks.
Yes, the SDK sucks.
Microsoft is like
That sums it up, I guess.
Microsoft is like modern communism. They define a box, and you are completely free within the box. But the moment you try to move outside the box, your little Microsoft dick falls right off. It's kind of sad.
Anyway,
Questions?
who else? QR, you got a question?
That's basically if you could talk more about the processor using the PlayStation 3 if that's PC.
Wait.
Then what's the cell?
Alright, so basically the cell processor, I can sort of explain this. It's sort of convoluted in my opinion because this whole multi-threading silliness that's going on right now, which I don't have a problem with multi-threading. I think it's great. It saves me a lot of ESRs. Anyway, with the cell processor inside the PlayStation 3, what you're actually... So with the PlayStation 3, the cell processor, what you're looking at is basically a heavily threaded PowerPC processor from IBM. It is non-standard, off-the-shelf. What they're actually doing is Sony is taking the leftover chips that IBM isn't putting into its blades and selling to telecommunications companies and various research firms. And they're taking these leftover chips because what happens with these chips when they make the yields for them, they'll end up with a certain number of chips with the silicon wafers that actually have all 8 threads enabled, and they'll end up with a certain number that only have 7. And Sony takes those ones with 7 because they're worthless to IBM, and Sony shoves them into the PlayStation 3 and still charges a ton of money for it. It's great. Intel does the same thing. They used to do it with clock speed. Now they're doing it with these Core 2 things. The Core 2s are actually Core 4s, but they've had probably one of the cores disabled because the other didn't work, and they're not going to release a Core 3 processor, basically. Although AMD doing that now, as it turns out. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? Nobody else? Me?
Yeah, I think the
Oh,
the cell processes that you're talking about.
Sorry, I got excited.
I think the cell processes that you're talking about actually.
yes.
I think they're the same ones that they use in the big supercomputers.
Well, there are, IBM, I believe, is actually throwing them into the Z-series machines now, as well as their blades. I know for a fact they're putting them in the blades now. But the thing is, like I said, they're the ones IBM saves and puts in the blades and all the machines. They're actually the full-fledged chips. You can run anything on them because that is what IBM intends for you to do. Sony, on the other hand, doesn't want you running anything other than their proprietary nonsense. And watching crappy Blu-ray movies like Spider-Man 3, which came with it. I don't know why. It was funny because I went out. What?
Spider-Man 3, Tobey Maguire?
It was terrible. The film was terrible. I don't care about Tobey Maguire.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so I'm gonna, at this point, ask this man here to hit the button on the projector, and I'm gonna try.
So I can interject.
Wait a minute! Don't do it yet. Don't do it yet.
Let it go.
You broke it. He didn't do that.
It was
He
not
didn't do
bad.
that. I did.
Yeah. Yeah, Nick was good.
All right, so there's not going to be any sound because
About to
I'm
give him a big internet fail.
trying to download.
Good laughter. Good laughter.
All right. Hey, look, it's my Wii.
Are you with something awful?
I'm going to try and make my Wii work.
Have problems with that?
Is my Wii working?
I like taking
Thank you. I don't know if it's been working
You have to
before.
be at least 2 feet away.
I'm gonna be 2 feet away. All right, I tell you what. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna point this direction.
You're gonna stand over here like.
It's somebody else. I guess I can stand over there. I have a wireless mic after all. I'm not gonna point my Wii at you. It's disgusting. So, okay. You stand right there and hold that so it's sideways pointed at me. No. Ow! Wait, there we go. Right there. That's perfect. Just hold it like that.
I already played with Nick's Wii, and his girlfriend already kicked my ass for that. So.
All right. So the first thing we're gonna do is go here, and we're gonna go to data management. And what I'm gonna do right now is I'm actually, and I apologize if my back's to you guys. I hope you can hear me with the mic.
No.
The
speakers didn't turn around.
Okay, so anyway. So what I'm going to do here is you can see this says Twilight Hack version 0.3, which is that's what I was getting at. They've released a new version. It's a chain loader app, so what it's going to do is allow me to load this other thing that's actually on the same memory card called boot.elf, which is an elf file like I was talking about. Don't worry, it'll ask me if I'm sure. Oh, no, wait a minute, I can't do it yet. I've got to go delete the other one. Hold on. Alright, now, what I'm going to point out to you is that there it is. I have the old one up here. Yes.
Are you sure you want to write this?
So wait a minute. So while it's doing this, you can see that it sort of took a while. It didn't just do it. Oh, it's erased. It took a second to think about it. What it's actually doing is running signed code and checking the signatures on that embedded ARM processor on the VPU, and it's checking to make sure it's all valid. And it's going to, when I copy this, you're going to notice it's going to take a while. See the little box moving? It's thinking. It's doing its thing.
Okay.
Oh, there it goes. So that's finished now. But the reason it's doing that is because it's checking to make sure everything's cool. Alright, I'm going to back again, and back again. And now it's a little blurry.
Who's in Turkey parade?
Alright, I'm going to run Zelda here. So, hopefully, if this all works the way it's supposed to, we're going to end up with a game of Tetris going on here.
I was disappointed that no an hour with some Zelda.
Yes, that does tell you how to safely play with your Wii. You play with it too much, you'll go Alright, so what you're going to see... Yeah, I already did that. So anyway, you can't see any of this, which you're supposed to be able to see. It doesn't really matter. So anyway, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run forward and I'm going to talk to this guy. So I'm going to hit the A button.
Missed.
There we go. Oh, and look at that. Oh, no, it's not going to run Tetris. It's calculating pi. There you go. That's a great use of this. I'm sorry. I got it wrong. So yeah, there is homebrew on a Wii, no mod chips. You can do this yourself. You can actually go out to the web. You can download a copy of Sigwin if you have a Windows machine. And you can download the toolkit for doing all the custom code on it, and you can make your own calculator for pi to 1,000 digits. Who knew? Anyway, so that is that. Now what I'm going to do is show you the Xbox, which hopefully will be easier because I don't have to sit and play with that stupid thing.
Did you compile this code yourself?
I did not compile this code. I used somebody else's compiled binary because I'm lazy
Do you know what
and didn't have
language
time.
it was written?
It was probably written, I believe everything right now is being written in C. There are emulators right now, and there is probably a project to, what they're doing right now literally with this thing. And the website for all of this, for the guys who made this hack, which is Team Tweezers, and they've actually been really nice with this because they've been very generous with the details compared to most people who release hacks for these consoles. What they've got going right now is a website called WiiBrew, WiiBrew.org, and what they're doing there is planning out their next moves as far as trying to get homebrew into what's known as a channel on this thing. You heard Al talking about the Mii Parade or whatever. That's a channel on the Wii. And what this team is trying to do is trying to get stuff to load into these channels currently. And they're in the process of it, and I suspect they'll have it done probably by the end of this year, if not in a couple of months. Knowing these guys, they've been moving really quickly. So now, Xbox time. So hopefully what I'm going to be able to do with this Xbox is show you a couple of things with it. The first thing I'm going to do is open it up. So inside you see a CD-ROM drive, it's actually a DVD-ROM drive, and a disk drive, hard disk drive. Underneath all this, I'm not going to go through the trouble of pulling it out because it's sort of tough to do. If you pull it out, what you'll see is a motherboard with a standard Intel CPU, some RAM, a couple other things. But you'll also, in this particular console, find a mod that I put in here. It's a Executor's XCE3, X3C, I believe. It's a particular type of mod chip. It is supposedly the king of mod chips for this console. It is probably the most expensive one you can buy, as well as the most fancy. It allows you to load a couple of different versions of firmware onto this thing instead of just one version of firmware. And the reason you would want to do that in the case of the Xbox is because while one firmware might allow you to load Linux really easily, another one might not allow you, or that same firmware might not allow you to load pirated games. And maybe you want to run Linux and play pirated games.
Did you
It's up to
get
you.
the manual switch with yours?
Yes, I do have the switch on the front of it, which I was going to show you as well. Although it's sort of tough to turn this thing
I put
around.
mine in the back. It was
Well, I
easy.
put this one on the front because the directions I was using said that's probably the coolest place to put it.
Oh, you got
That's the switch.
You got the other one.
Yeah, I didn't get the actual.
I got the Q one with the three
Oh,
little
that's cool.
toggles.
The big switch is the side switch that says hacked or unhacked.
Magic and more magic?
Yes, magic and more magic at this point.
It's actually a bank selector. He's going to explain that in just a second.
Well, I'm not going to entirely display that. What I'm going to do is just let it do its thing when I boot it up here, which hopefully I'll be able to do. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load Linux onto it so you guys can see what's going on. Hopefully it'll, and I have no idea what version of Linux I'm going to load into it. It's something I downloaded from the Xbox Linux project website. You see this thing down here? This is how you know it's been modded. In case I need to explain that. Anyway. So what it's giving me is a menu for where I can go to look at various things. I can look at, so for instance, the hard disk on the Xboxes are locked and you can't stick them in. So there's hard drive lock enabled. What that means is that the hard disk drive is actually locked. It has a password on the first little sector on the disk. And it prevents me from taking it out of here, despite the fact that it's in TFS format and sticking in a Windows machine reading it. So what I can do with this is I can unlock the hard drive and I can stick it in a Windows machine and it'll read it. I can also upgrade the hard drive.
So you covered marriage and divorce theory.
I suppose I have no idea what you're referencing.
The hard drive is married to the EEPROM on the motherboard, the marriage and divorce theory.
It sort of is. There's more to it. I don't know if you know about hard. I'm not
I've
thinking of
done
hard
the
disk.
extensive
Yeah.
work on mine.
That's fine. The hard disk on this machine uses actually an ATA password spec. So it is married to quote unquote the machine. But while it is there, you could actually take if you know the password, which
Yeah.
I don't
It
know.
should spit out.
You can actually.
Avalanche spits it out.
I'm not gonna bother. Anyway, so you can actually go in and look at the password in certain instances, and if you take that password and then proceed to stick the machine inside of a regular, normal PC, and the PC has the correct BIOS and all that good stuff, then it'll prompt you for the ATA password, and you can actually enter it and get the drive to work. Why the hell you would go through all that, I don't know. You can just unlock the daggone thing. So that's it for that. Now what I'm going to do is put Linux onto it. And you do that with this particular mod chip. It detects what buttons you're pressing on the controller at startup. And depending on what button you're pressing, you can get into different things. So what I'm going to do is eject the CD-ROM currently. By the way, I was talking about the Wii and how it's been exploited currently. The Wii is using an exploit through the Twilight Princess save game hack, and because of that, only some versions of this work. Currently, every version you buy probably works. However, if you buy one a month from now, I can't guarantee it's going to work. So if you want a Wii, or if you've already got one, go buy the game now before Nintendo patches the stupid thing. Because when they do, these are going to be more expensive and a lot harder to find. If they haven't already patched it, I really don't know. So I'm going to reboot this thing. And what it's going to do, with any luck, is load one. Which I don't have a keyboard hooked up to it, but because these controllers are actually just basically glorified USB setups, you can hook up USB keyboards to this thing, among other things, or USB storage, anything. You can turn it into a media center, which is what a lot of people do. Hook them up to their TVs to watch stuff. So there you go, that's loading Linux. I'm really not going to go any further in depth into just letting it load. If you guys want to play with it, leave it there for some reason. Is there any more questions? This is a version 1.0. It actually belongs to Rick Dakin, who was at this con a couple of years back. He's a writer guy who wrote Geek Mafia. If anybody has read that, go read that. And he's also written Geek Mafia 2. Both of them are licensed under Creative Commons, and you can download them from Project Gutenberg or from the EFF website, which I also believe sells copies now. So I'll plug Rick's book for him since he went to the Xbox. He also paid for the mods, so I didn't have to pay for them.
So,
except for the 80 bucks.
fully modded, it can do everything a computer can do.
You got it.
It can all picture formats.
You got it. You can. A lot of people, like I said, use these things heavily as media center PCs, DivX, whatever you can download, you can stick on this thing.
It can't play. It chokes on MKV.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll take your word for it.
But can you mod it and play on PlayStation games?
Yes.
That's actually an interesting.
PlayStation
Wait
1
a
games
minute.
off original.
So that's actually an interesting question. And what you've asked is basically, if I have a disc for say the GameCube or the Wii, and I want to play it on the Xbox, can I do that? The short answer is yes, because as Turing said, you have all of these universal Turing machines basically, and they all allow you to execute the same code. Okay, they all use basically the same thing. The problem is you have to do it through emulation, so it might take longer, which means it could run slower, or it might not work at all based on disk specifications. But the disk specification is yet another. You could probably fudge your way around it somehow.
Right.
So the short answer is yes. The long answer is maybe.
If you have the right idea.
So I actually made that joke initially when everybody was running out to buy their PlayStation 3s, because people I work with, you can actually, I made the joke about being able, I have the access to the only machine in the world capable of emulating the PlayStation 3, which is an IBM Blade. It's the only one that's capable of doing it right now. Nothing else can compete with that speed. So anyway, there you go, Linux on an Xbox. That's the end of my presentation. So.